All right, so this is the Tuesday night chanting group, and the first Tuesday in December, so we're having our monthly chanting discussion. And the floor is now open for ideas for what to talk about. Possibly something about Buddhist chanting or something that in some way, because the Buddhist chants really cover all of the teachings of Buddhism. So really there's the door is wide open for just about anything.
I think for for my practice, I've been trying pretty uh, religiously every day to memorize the Great Dharani, and I'm having some trouble
Hmm.
getting that down. Maybe some best practices from each of
Hmm.
you that would help with that. Really, right now, my practice is listening to it and trying to chant along with it. I've tried writing it down, but I usually um, haven't made enough time for that yet
Mm-hmm.
to do enough writing down. But I'd like to maybe see what you guys do to remember or memorize chants like that.
I used an already written form from the chant book that we had at Kurt's. I found reading it was
Mm-hmm.
easier to memorize it that way.
Elizabeth, how long, because I know that Zach is fairly, fairly new to this. And so my advice is, don't fault yourself for having it take a while. Uh, I've been chanting here with Kurt, I don't know, a year plus or minus, and I don't have it, and it's hard, especially when you're dealing with something in a foreign language, and and so I just say don't get frustrated. Uh, what I think what you're doing is great. I like Elizabeth's suggestion of that's always a big help for me when I can see that written word. Um, but but don't get frustrated with yourself because it just is hard and it takes a while.
Yeah, if you attend enough live retreats where there's chanting, you'll have the experience of hearing the chant leader screw up the chant, um, up to and including very high-ranking teachers. Um, so I mean, and like I have done that both by myself and while leading the chants. The reading the chant while you're doing it is, I think, is a good practice even once you have the chant pretty well memorized. Um, in fact, once you have a chant pretty well memorized, it's very easy for your mind to wander while you're chanting. And so having it right there in front of you, reading it along as you're going, is good. No matter what. And then of course, if you learn the Great Dharani, then you might be tempted then to learn another chant. You might be tempted to learn the Korean version of the Heart Sutra by heart. You might be tempted to learn the Homage to the Three Jewels by heart. You might be tempted to learn whatever, and then that will create. Once you know more than one chant, more or less by heart, then you can you can forget which one you're doing, or I mean, and then as you age, the things that you've learned over time aren't as anyway. So it's a practice. And I think that it's a practice. It's very, very much in many ways like sitting meditation. Every time you do sitting meditation, who knows what's going to happen? Who knows if you can count to 10 once if you're doing breath counting? Who knows if you'll be able to stay on the cushion for the amount of time that you set? So it's every time we practice, it should be fresh and new and and surprising, which includes, realizing you don't know what you're doing. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, that's a good question, and that's a question that comes from practice. And so that's the best thing to do is just, definitely don't be hard on yourself. So I was very embarrassed after having been a Zen student for about, I think it had been less than 5 years since I had taken 5 precepts, and I attended a 90-day retreat in Korea, and I was the only one there who didn't have all the chants memorized, and so that was I wasn't that embarrassed, but it was a little, I felt, and that was really when I came out of there with knowing the chants a lot better, and that was doing the chants twice a day, every day for 90 days. With a bunch of people who chanted really strongly, and coming to have a tremendous amount of appreciation for how much I got out of chanting.
So I just came out of the Furnace Mountain Teachers Week,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to kind of reiterate what Kurt just said. It was Teachers Week there, and yet I was clearly behind. I think they're doing some really good things at Cincinnati Zen Center, and I could tell they're actively teaching it there.
Mm-hmm.
And so two things occurred to me. One, I was by far the least skillful, especially since they were all also doing mock top work and doing it well. By the same token, I was happy with how well I was doing. So it was kind of a two-edged sword for me. They were clearly advanced beyond me, but I was happy. I did better than maybe I would have expected.
Mm-hmm.
Kurt, can I ask on that 90-day retreat?
Mm-hmm.
Was it was it mostly Koreans? Was it an international group? What was the mix there?
Yeah, so this was so we followed the traditional Korean Kyoche 90-day retreat schedule and format mostly, but this was so Zen Master Sung San was he always did things his own way. He was, in many ways, he's very traditional. Carried on and helped, probably more than anyone else has or possibly ever will, help to propagate the practices and just the existence of Korean Buddhism throughout the world outside of Korea, and really internationalized it so that it's not even the people who follow Zen Master Sung San's teachings. They are practicing a tradition that comes from Korea, and that has certain aspects of it that are definitely Korean, but it's something much bigger than just Korean Buddhism, in my opinion. But anyway, so he recently I talked to a friend of mine, a Korean friend of mine, who's a very serious Dharma practitioner and who has done several Kilches in Korea. And she just mentioned to me that in the Kilches that the 90-day retreats that she has attended, they didn't do chanting. And at first, I didn't understand what she was saying, and so I had to, ask for it. Well, what do you mean? You mean you didn't do? I mean, what do you mean you didn't do chanting? Basically, I said. She said, "Oh no, 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 no chanting." And then, so first I didn't understand what she was saying. Then I wasn't sure if I believed what she was saying, but she was quite clear about it. And I did some research on it, and it's true. So this is why this is a bit of a tangent, but we did all the chanting that Zen Master Sung San taught as part of the regular practice in his Dharma centers. We did that every day. And now I'm trying to remember what exactly was the question, Tom, that got me off on this. I'm trying to describe the chanting practice that we did on Kilche.
Yeah, that's useful and helpful, and I'm interested.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the question was it an international mix
Oh,
of
yeah. Right.
attendees?
Okay.
So, yeah.
Right. So since we were not so the usual rules, and this is an interesting question of the relationship between Zen and chanting, which is not just a question that Westerners have. It's also an issue for Koreans and other people. At least today, among Korean Buddhists, Korean Buddhists, they consider only silent sitting meditation. That's Zen, okay? And so if you do a 90-day Zen retreat, it's supposed to be just sitting, and they might. So there is a little ceremony that's done every day. It's called the rice offering ceremony, and that ceremony honors the people who have donated money to help support the retreat. So you kind of have to do it. And there's some chanting that there's a liturgy that's involved with that. But the morning bell chant, all the other stuff, evening bell chant, 1,000 Antanai Sutra twice a day, everything, is not done as part of a usual. And so since this was also I don't know if this has changed yet in Korea, it may have, but also at a traditional Kilche 90-day retreat, men and women are not supposed to be in the same room together. And our compromise was that men, it was about half and half at our retreat. And so we had women on one side of the room and men on the other side of the room. But we also rotated roles, and so it was a little dicey whenever one of the women was doing the Moktak, because the Moktak person sits on the side of the room that had been arbitrarily assigned to the men. So anyway, so it was not, we did have several Koreans who joined the retreat during the middle week of the 90-day retreat, which is intensive week, which is where you only get, instead of getting 6 hours of sleep, you get 3 hours of sleep every night, and then on the last night you don't get any. There's no sleeping period, because that's the night that commemorates the night of the Buddha's enlightenment. That's Buddha's. So the 8th day of that week is Buddha's Enlightenment Day. Anyway, so during that week, during intensive week, there were a bunch of Koreans who were Zen Master Sung San's students in Korea who came and joined us. But other than that, it was all non-Koreans. We had several people from Malaysia, but it was mostly North Americans and Europeans. And for Koreans, what we were doing was not considered correct. And it was only because Zen Master Sung San had a strong personal relationship with the abbot of Shinwansa, the temple where we held it. That was the way that he was able to get away with doing his Kilches his way. And then eventually the Kwanum School of Zen built their own temple in Korea. Musangsa, which is now the internationally the head temple for the Zen Master Sung San's the Quantum School of Zen, the group that he
Say
formed.
that Quantum Temple again. What's the name of that?
Musangsa. And if you go to the Quantum School of Zen website, they'll explain it to you. They'll have directions there and everything. But I'm gonna move my microphone up a little bit. But yeah, so it was a bunch of people from all over the world, but not Korea, because the Koreans do their own retreat according to the rules of the Choge order. And Zen Master Sung San's relationship is interesting. This is recorded. I'm going to put this up on YouTube. See, but Zen Master Sung San's relationship with the Choge order was very interesting. Very, not particularly all that complicated. Basically, he stayed in the Choge order, and when he was around under the auspices of in Korea or doing things with the Choge order, he followed the rules. But elsewhere, he did things his own way. Which, unless you're really familiar with the rules and regulations of the Choge order, you might not notice a difference. But one thing, this is okay. I'm going to stop. But I want to say one thing, that this is a very interesting thing about Zen Master Sung San and his teaching. I don't think he ever mentioned Chinol, who's by many people considered one of the greatest figures in the history of Korean Buddhism. But actually, over the last 30 years or more, or 40 years or more, last three heads, at least the last three, if not four heads of the Choge order, have been harshly critical of Chinol. And in particular have criticized the thing that Chinol is most famous for, which is his teaching of sudden enlightenment and gradual cultivation. The official party line of the Choge order is that gradual cultivation is not correct. That enlightenment and cultivation are only sudden. That there's no anything gradual is not Zen. Anything gradual is, for those other people who, of lesser capacity, who need stages and whatever. But anyway, so that I would say that Zen Master Sung San's teaching was influenced by Chinol's teaching, but he never publicly talked about Chinol, and I even when he was in the West. And that's another thing. You wouldn't notice that unless you look for it, So these differences between what Zen Master Sung San taught and what the Choge order, actually the Choge order is now trying to get people to no longer chant the way we chant. They're trying to get everybody to chant in Korean, which all of the chants that Zen Master Sung San taught were actually in classical Chinese, which is the way that Koreans Buddhists have always chanted, and it's the way Vietnamese Buddhists have always chanted, the way Japanese Buddhists, for the most part, have always chanted, and of course it's the way Chinese Buddhists. You might say, of course it's the way Chinese Buddhists also chant, but Chinese people do not speak classical Chinese. They speak Mandarin or Cantonese or Shanghaiese or whatever. It's a little bit easier if you're a Mandarin or Cantonese speaker to get classical Chinese. But anyway, but there was a very international group. I think this was your question. It's a very international group, and it was people from all over the world who were students of Zen Master Sung San or students of his students. And the retreat was led by Zen Master Degaka. And we followed Zen Master Sung San's idea of what Kyolche is supposed to be, not the Choge order's idea. Although it was a compromise, because we did separate men and women on different sides of the room, which Zen Master Sung San was would you never see that at any. You wouldn't see that at Furnace Mountain or any other place that's run by someone who is trained by Zen Master Sung San. The idea of separating women and men.
So at our Tam Mao, our Vietnamese temple, uh, during the we don't do that in the English language group,
Mm-hmm.
but they do separate men and women on women on as you face the Buddha, right? Women on the right side, men on the left. But it's not strict. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
someone has a toddler
Mm-hmm.
and the mom and dad sit there with uh, on either side with the toddler, and it's just not kept strictly, but it is observable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, uh, can I? I want to pose a question about Chinol um, that I don't hear that I should think people would talk about more, and they don't. I don't hear it. I don't hear it anywhere talking about Chinol. Um, and and so and it's really interesting. And this question is really interesting to me. So Chinol um, said the mind is numinous, and the and so I did a lot of reading on okay, what's he talking about here? What are we really meaning by numinous? And I don't think you can mistake the meaning of numinous as being uh, connected and and feeling a connection um, to what the universe, the divine, um, and and so I have always before Buddhism I've been kind of a believer in universal consciousness and this so for me, this Chinul saying the mind is numinous, I'm like, yeah, I think that's right, but um, I don't hear it talked about often, and often unless I'm talking about it, and so I'm curious if you have delved into that at all and what your thoughts are on it.
That wasn't just to me, right? That was to everybody.
That's to anybody who has any familiarity at all with
I've read The Way of Korean Zen exactly one time. Um, but the way you understand it, Tom, is the way I understood it when he wrote it. Though I will say that I didn't delve deeply into the word itself. Um, and I have a habit when I read intellectually like that of pushing through instead of sitting on chapters long enough. So typically speaking, my second read is when I will take a lot longer to sit on each. For some reason, my brain wants to digest as much information as possible. So I usually will blow through a book fairly quickly. But yeah, I'm going to keep that in the back of my mind when I come back to the Way of Korean Zen to inspect that a little bit more deeply so we can have a conversation about it. Fantastic book, by the way, if you haven't read it. It definitely does a lot to lend toward um, the growth of practice and talking through some of the things that are somewhat, I don't know, glossed over is the right way to talk about it, but like easily missed details in the practice, I think, are discussed in that book that are fairly helpful to, especially a beginner.
Yeah. Actually, I read that before I read Compasses Down, and yeah, I agree. I really found that very helpful,
Hmm.
and I'm yeah. So I appreciate that.
I wish I had read it before the compasses in. I can actually, if I think about it. Every time you read a book, it's basically a brand new reading, right? It's a different perspective, whatever headspace you're in at the time you read it. But yeah, yeah. Hmm. You've given me something to think about. I like it.
Yeah, and sometimes, so when uh, when you know, only this. Sometimes I want to say, no, no, it's not only this. There's more, and uh, and yet, it, but I don't, I just don't hear people. I would like to have a deeper understanding of how everyone feels about this or understands this, and so far I haven't gotten it.
Mhm. So if and this might be too intellectual of an approach, but um, Chinol uh, got the phrase numinous awareness from another guy named Zong Mi or Tsung Mi, um, who was really who's also the person that Chinol got the idea of sudden enlightenment, gradual cultivation from. Um, and so, I would encourage you to, look into that, and
Yeah.
really dig deeper. Uh, into where that phrase come from, so it gets translated into English as numinous, which is an interesting word. And I actually think that the meaning of, so the English word numinous comes from the Latin numen, which was a word that was associated with um, Roman pagan religion. It was kind of their word for uh, or one of their words for divinity or the qualities of that which is divine. Um, and if you look at the, what is it? It's Yong, pronounced Yong in Sino-Korean, um, and it's definitely a word that has what a lot of people would consider overly religious and divinity, divine. What does divine mean? So what does divine mean? If we want to go with the meaning that it has something to do with divine or divinity, what does that mean to Buddhists? What is divine? What is sacred to Buddhists? Um, and I think it's interesting to look at what you said, Tom, about it's not only this. There's something more. And so, what more is there? And so, what's wrong with only this? And let me just say what I think is wrong with only this is the word only. Um, it's like when people say ordinary mind is the way. Um, I think that's true, but it also points to the fact that we have very little appreciation for just how extraordinary the ordinary mind is. Um, what do you think of Chinol, Elizabeth? Elizabeth, I know you've read Chinol, but probably not recently.
It's been a long time, but I just have a pretty like basic understanding that he wanted to bring the two together,
The two what?
bring different schools together, the
Yeah,
sutra school and the meditation school.
right. And that's another very interesting and important thing about Chinul, and another reason why in certain circles in Korean Buddhism, Chinul is not popular because he uh, he denounced the sectarianism of Zen at his time, where the Zen school held itself apart from all the other schools of Buddhism, and in particular were very critical of the schools that they referred to as the Gyo school, which means learning, or I'm not
Yeah.
sure what it means, but he wanted to overcome that division. He didn't think there should be different schools of Buddhism. Basically, he didn't think that was it wasn't just that this that the Zen people were doing it wrong. He thought the Kyo people were doing it wrong as well. That there shouldn't be these divisions in Buddhism. And at the time, um, people admired his high-minded non-sectarianism, but they went on with they continued on as they were, um, until the coming of the Chosun dynasty in Korea, which is when the Buddhists lost favor with the ruling class. And when the Buddhists lost favor with the ruling class, all of a sudden it was no longer um, sustainable to keep for everybody to have their own school of Buddhism, because that required everybody to have their own pot of money, so that each school could have. I mean, first and foremost, to have your own school of Buddhism means you have your own temples, you have your own real estate. Okay, and up until that time, there were like 9 schools of Zen. They were called the Nine Mountain School, and I think they all each had their own separate temples, or maybe they, I don't know, but and they were separate from the other temples, and that was all based upon getting lots of support the um, from the government and from the aristocracy. And once Buddhism was no longer the official religion in Korea, that was no longer. Well, they decided that non-sectarianism was better because it was easier to fund, for one thing, um, and so they made a virtue out of necessity, and they said, "Oh, this is what Chinul, um, and so and that situation continued for 500 years until 1905, when Korea was invaded and conquered by the Japanese, well, anyway, they decided to impose their own form of Buddhism on Korea. And now the Buddhists in Korea, as long as they, and this was a very difficult situation for Korean Buddhists, on the one hand, they were no longer on the outs. On the other hand, they had to play along with the foreign conquerors, or face the consequences. Japanese were not happy about anybody who didn't, go along with them. So, and then when the Korean occupation finally ended in 1945, then for the first time in over half a millennium, really, seriously, Korean Buddhism was no longer officially discouraged by the government, and also not under the heel of the Japanese, and that's where the Choge order came out of that, and all the Taego and other groups. Anyway, but then, so all during the 500 years of the Chosun dynasty, Chinul's teachings were, I don't know if they were popular, but they were, especially his non-sectarianism was put into practice out of necessity, because they could, because they just, it was hard enough for them to have any temples at all. But numinous awareness is, what have you read about numinous awareness, Tom? Or, I mean,
Well, a few things. One, that uh, my understanding would be that to Chinul, sudden awakening is you discovering that your mind is numinous, that
mm-hmm.
you are connected to something greater. Um, and of course, you know, we one of the things we teach is interconnectedness, right? The hard to know where I end and you begin, you know, kind of kind of understanding. So my interpretation was that that was what Chinul said was that sudden awakening was your discovery that we were all part of a whole, that we were all interconnected to each other. Um, and then I've seen I do understand that there's been a larger um, discussion in in other religious circles. So in European Christianity, that this is something that is talked about. So it's not only applicable to Buddhism. It's a more widely it's more widely believed in, and certainly compatible with other religious doctrine. Um, and one of the things I wondered about was, okay, have because it's had more airplay than this, right? In other circles, is that influencing my interpretation of Chinol? And I don't know the answer to that. And like I said, I don't get to I don't get to have enough discussions about it that because I think it's a pretty phenomenal statement, you know, and so and that's kind of the my original reason for bringing it up here because I don't hear enough discussion about it.
You know, you're not wrong that the discussions amongst other spiritual practices or religions does brush pretty strongly along the same strokes as what Chinul talked about with numinosity or the numinous mind. I think that um, you know, when you think about the broader concepts that he kind of talked about with it, or what you've described even in terms of interconnectedness or being the moment with the moment, or emptiness, even if you wanted to go that far, there is that description of those concepts in many different spiritual practices that I think do fit what your understanding is kind of coming from. I do think, you know, and this crossed my mind the other day during one of my sits that the perspectives that I tend to identify with sometimes, and I catch myself, are a lot of also cause and effect that kind of fold through. In that my perspective kind of comes from a series of dominoes that have kind of led myself to that. And I wonder, it's almost curious to me that the, the the Unitarian past has kind of helped that understanding for you and helped kind of open that extra bit of understanding that in that department. It's really cool to actually to like become aware of, like, oh, yes, okay, another perspective. Interesting. I don't know. I always like kind of discussing those things because it is interesting whenever someone says a word or talks about a concept and then they actually hit that key word that you really feel you understand, and it's like, oh, now I get it. I understand what you're talking about. I don't know where I was going with that, but yeah.
If you Google Chinol and Numinous Awareness, one of the first things that comes up. Of course, it was Robert Buswell who came up with this English phrase, Numinous Awareness, as a English translation of the Chinese phrase Yang Li. I think it's Yang Li. Yang Ji is the Korean pronunciation of the Chinese. And you can find it. So one of the good things about this little article that was one of the first PDF that shows up is that it has the Chinese characters along with the old. Yeah, in fact, I might as well share my screen just so I'm not going to take up too much time with this, but just so I'm not looking at one thing and that no one else can see. It's kind of the opposite of numinous awareness. Yeah, so here, oh yeah, let's see. I can make it bigger. Yeah, this is numinous awareness. This is, in fact, let's make this really big because it's a cool character right there. This is the numinous part. This is yang, and this is ji. Ji is just one of the standard words for consciousness. Standard words for consciousness. Yeah, it can mean all kinds of things, up to and including more, Buddhist and more kind of elaborate, but awareness, conscious. I mean, people talk about awareness and consciousness, being aware of something and being conscious of something without having any particular Buddhist intention in talking about it, right? So consciousness is a normal thing, right? Numinosity is not a normal everyday thing. So when you put them together, but one of the things that Buswell talks about in this that I think is really interesting is, where is it? Oh yeah, Chinol. Here, this one right here. Numinous awareness was adopted by Zongmi, who came several centuries before Chinol in China. Adopted by Zongmi and eventually Chinol to refer to the fundamental quality of sentience, which, not so figuratively, as in almost literally, shines on sense objects, illuminating them and allowing them to be cognized. And this is actually in the Heart Sutra when what do we say? We say at the very beginning, we say Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, while practicing deeply the Prajnaparamita, perceives that all five skandhas are empty and is saved from all suffering and distress. The word that gets, or the two words in Chinese that actually get translated into English as perceives, means to shine a light on and perceive. And so this is an active as opposed to a passive view of the way that our minds interact with the world. It's not just a matter of, and of course, in Buddhism, the mind is not in here. Zen Master Sung San would sometimes ask people, "Where is your mind?" And if you made the mistake of pointing to your head, Zen Master Sung San would then say, "Oh," he would kind of squint and look out and say, "Oh, your mind is very small." And then he would hold up a wristwatch or hold up something and say, "What is this?" And the person would say, "Well, that's a wristwatch." And he'd look at the wristwatch and he'd look at you. He'd say, "Did your mind fly over here?" And then fly back into your head? How do you know this is a wristwatch? Where does your awareness of the wristwatch come from? Of course, scientifically, the awareness of the wristwatch comes from light reflecting off of the wristwatch and entering into your eyes and firing off the neurons in your brain and telling you what it is. And then, of course, looking up in your memory banks, what is this shape? What is the, anyway. But, of course, Zen Master Sung San was making a point. He's a very highly educated man, so he knows how perception works. But he also knows how numinous awareness works, which numinous awareness is this active kind of awareness, not a passive awareness that's sitting inside your head waiting for stuff to come to it, but that actually interacts with and shines on what's being perceived. Where is that in the Heart Sutra?
So I was looking, I have tracing back the radiance.
Mm-hmm.
But I was looking for Buswell's other work
Mm-hmm.
on Chinol
Mm-hmm.
and not remembering the name right now. Um,
The
but
first two words of the title are Numinous Awareness.
but that book is like $250 if you can find it, and that was just a bit rich for me. I want to know what's in it, but
Yes, there is. You can find the PDF version if you look around. It might even be on Terabess. And I have that PDF. Yeah, so because I don't have $250 for a book.
yeah.
Um, oh, but in addition to, oh yeah, so in addition to reading other stuff that Robert Buswell has written specifically about Chinol, there's a great book by a guy named Peter Gregory, I think that's his name, called Tsung Mi, which is also Zong Mi, and the Sinification of Buddhism. Sinification means the Chineseification of Buddhism. And he talks all about, so he doesn't have, I don't know if Peter Gregory talks about Chinol in that book or not, but he talks about the guy that Chinol got, well, the guy that Chinol was greatly inspired by, and that Chinol considered himself to be a Dharma heir. You know, we in Zen there tends to be an idea that is often not particularly correct. You know, that the Dharma is somehow something that can be, you know, handed from one person to another. In Which means that you can't be a Dharma heir in a lineage unless you know, physically meet the person that you received the lineage from. In Pure Land Buddhism, they also have lineage charts of ancestors, but they're often separated by hundreds of years. And if you ask Pure Land people, how can that possibly be? They look at you funny, like, these are the people who have, you know, who are our great teachers, you know, who understand the Pure Land teachings and that we learn from, you know, and the teaching isn't something that somebody has in their pocket and can, you know, hand to you. The Dharma is available to everybody. Numinous awareness is available to everybody. And so that brings up one thing. I don't know how much more time we have. I'm not looking at the, yeah, but so it sounds to me, Tom, like one of the things that you're particularly interested in this idea of numinous awareness is the idea of something that is everywhere, all the time.
Yeah, so I've got a, now this might be blasphemy that I bring this up,
Mm-hmm.
but Dan Brown's latest novel, uh, The Secret of Secrets, I'm only about halfway through it, and it's an audio. What I've rented is an audio book, or what I've checked out of the library is an audio book. But before I get all that far, they check it back in, and I lose it, and
Mm.
then I have to get in line to get it again. So I'm about halfway through it, but it is um, so far. The theme of it is that consciousness is not inside your head, which I had not heard that before, and that kind of was like, whoa, that's interesting. So, but I don't know where they go with it. So, it's an element. And then I was trying to watch this one, which I also haven't finished. Sorry, a lot of incomplete stuff. Was this discussion? Is the what is it? The field, the universal field, or the is that consciousness? And it's just it just that just more like confuses me because
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand it well at all. So.
My microphone has consciousness. It doesn't like to be up high. I can set it there. I can tighten it as much as I want, and it will gradually go down. Anyway, um, so Dan Brown, interesting guy, and I mean, I like Carlos Castaneda. Anybody here a Carlos Castaneda fan? I'm a Carlos Castaneda fan. I mean, everybody has, and 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 I perfectly understand people who look askance at anybody who takes Carlos Castaneda seriously, or Dan Brown or whatever. I understand that, and I wouldn't. I don't consider them to be reliable sources of information, but they are they and one thing that's important to do with someone like Dan Brown or Carlos Castaneda is to find out where did they get that from. And and the story with Carlos Castaneda, he was a anthropology student at UCLA who did groundbreaking research studying Native Americans who took peyote, and one of his friends and colleagues, God, whose name I now can't remember, but I mean, there are people who went to school with him who became, uh, more straight and normal anthropologists, with faculty positions and stuff. Who no, and if you find those people and talk to them, they'll say, "Oh yeah, we know Carlos, this weird guy," and and he did, and his books were based upon stuff that he really did discover, um, talking to real Native Americans who used peyote. They were also based upon his studies of Gurdjieff and occult and things that probably people would consider New Age or whatever that he threw in there, in order for him to be able to explain in terms that he could understand and also that he could use to sell books, to a larger audience, the things that he saw or thought he saw. Um, but yeah, and Dan Brown is also someone who has studied a lot of occult and esoteric stuff, and then writes novels, uh, which he freely admits that's what they are. They're not textbooks on how to do stuff, but they could be interesting sources of information, um, as is Robert Buswell. Robert Buswell and Peter Gregory are more reliable sources of information, and who fortunately are also good writers. They're not writing fiction, but they are, compared to a lot of people, compared to a lot of Buddhist scholars, they're really excellent writers, in my opinion. And all of this is highly relevant to the subject of Buddhist chanting, because a lot of the things that we have been talking about have danced around. Um, I mentioned that Chinol is actually considered quite controversial today in Korean Buddhism. I also mentioned that the way that Zen Master Sung San conducted Kyolche retreats was uh, very different, especially in particular in terms of its inclusion of a great deal of chanting. Um, and yeah, I think that one of the things that I'm very interested in is um, less sectarian, more what I consider syncretic approaches to Buddhism, um, that I find to be more attractive to me. but I also consider that I also like to think that they don't just appeal to my agreement that I agree with them. They also, I think that they have a lot to offer in terms of their practical value. And I can tell you, I would have never made it through a 90-day retreat if we did not have chanting, 2 hours of chanting every afternoon, because I got so much energy from that chanting that I always considered that the day's practice was not over, but the hard part was over. When we got to chanting, the evening chanting, there was another 2 or 3 hours of sitting meditation after that, but I just glided through it, because of the energy, the buzz or whatever you could say from that I got from chanting. And then also the first thing we did in the morning, I didn't appreciate the fact that we had to do 2 hours of practice every 2 or 3 hours of practice every morning before we ate breakfast. But the fact that most of that was chanting got me started every day, and I cannot. So for me, it's an absolutely essential support for practice and sitting meditation. Trying to do sitting meditation every day for 90 days without all of that chanting would have been completely impossible for me.
So that brings me back to Zach's original question on his practice. And the one thing I was going to say, you've heard me say, I may be the world's worst chanter. I may be terrible at it, but when we finish a chanting session, I feel good, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah.
So,
How beautiful to be able to practice at all.
And it is a beautiful thing. And I would say that it isn't possible to practice unless you find some practice that makes you feel good. Because you won't do it otherwise. You might force yourself to do it for a while, but it will not be a lifelong practice if you're not getting something from it, in my opinion. And sitting, I love sitting. I love sitting meditation. And I consider myself I am very, very grateful that when I first started practicing, Zen sitting meditation, that I got something from it, that I got some sort of, reinforcement that kept me coming back. Not everybody gets that. A lot of people have some interest in meditation. They show up and they try it. And, it's hard. All practice is actually hard. So it's good when makes you feel good. I think.
Tom, the book you were talking about, Oklahoma State University has the copy in their library.
Numinous
In
Awareness
Stillwater.
is Never Dark?
The Collected Works of Chinul,
Oh, okay.
The Korean Approach to Zen. They have a copy,
Yeah.
a first edition copy, actually.
Oh, good. Oh, yeah. So that's bigger. The Tracing Back to Radiance, which has a lot of the same material in it, doesn't have as much. It's basically a pared down version of the original.
Yeah, the collected works of Chanel, that's the one I was referring to.
Yeah.
It's very expensive.
Yeah. Oh, well, and so is Numinous Awareness is Never Dark, the Korean Buddhist Master Chinul's excerpts, which is kind of the follow-on book, which I'm looking at it right now. You can get it slightly used for $125.
The Numinous, I think I got that.
Awareness is Never Dark. Also by Robert Buswell.
They have a Kindle version on Amazon. You can order of that. $28.
Oh, well, there you go.
Oh,
Not bad.
Actually, just bought it.
Okay. Yeah.
I have so many books backlog.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's worth it. Buswell, he spent 5 years in Korea as a monk studying. He's studying with someone who is a direct Dharma descendant of Chinol in the temple that I believe was Chinol's temple, main temple. And yeah. Oh well, we're getting well past 8.
yes.
And so let's just recite the 4 vows to end. See if I can find 4 vows like everything else. There's different versions. This is the one that we will do. So that we're all doing the same thing. Oh, yeah, I should share my screen up there. Here we go. The 4 great vows. Sentient beings are numberless. We vow to save them all. Delusions are endless. We vow to cut through them all. The teachings are infinite. We vow to learn them all. The Buddha way is inconceivable. We vow to attain it. May whatever excellent qualities we have gained from this practice be extended for the benefit of all beings. So, thanks everybody. It was a very interesting discussion.
Thank you so much.
Thanks
Appreciate you.
for bringing us.
Thank you all for the discussion.
Keeping it going. Yeah. Bye-bye. See you next time.